Can the ult be sidestepped easily? So my take on the ultimate is I think it's one of those spells that's only flashable and not super dodgeable. I would compare it to, probably not as much as a Malphite ult, but you know how with Malphite you can definitely flash it if you're like watching for it, and you can definitely like try to sidestep it a little bit if you're watching for it, but overall it's like if you don't have flash, you're probably gonna get hit. I think that's the case in a number of situations with AMBESSA'S ult. That said, unlike Malphite, it is very thin. So if she's not aiming it well, I think a really reactive player could definitely sidestep it. But it feels like it's fast enough to me that the main way you're going to be avoiding this ultimate is by flashing or dashing, as opposed to like pure movement. But I still think that's a big deal, that it can be dodged. There's a lot of spells in League of Legends that are like more on the owner to miss. That doesn't mean like they're not dodgeable. Like, you know, generally ultimates tend to be on the reliable side. So yeah, looks like something where basically if you're using this and your opponent's not really ready to react to it, they're probably going to get hit. You can't tell me they really care when the community again and again get mad about these 200-year champions, and then they now release another 200 years champion. So if you think certain characters are problematic, I think that's totally fair to criticize us for. But I want to give you a little anecdote, and I think this is important. One of my learnings over the years is that if there is a character that comes out and Reddit flames it, then it probably is a fun character that many League players enjoy. And one of the important things to me that I learned, you know, half a decade ago is, so I'll tell you a story about YASUO. YASUO came out, and, you know, of course, there's definitely a lot of flame about YASUO. If you all didn't know, YASUO historically has been the most popular champion in League of Legends. So despite the fact that there's a number of people who are like, YASUO is frustrating, which is true, he can be frustrating to play against, we generally see him as one of the most successful champions ever made. Like, there's tons of people who love YASUO. But one of the things is that YASUO also always used to have a really high ban rate, and if you ever went on like a place like Reddit, you'd see people like always being like, YASUO is so OP, what's going on? And so for a long time, I, as a designer, was like, yeah, Yasuo's popular, people love him, but like, was it worth it? He seems like the most frustrating champion in the game. Was that a good idea? And then eventually we got regional data. We did surveys where we like kind of like, you know, surveyed the entire world on like who thought Yasuo was good and who thought he was bad. And surprisingly, what we found is that if you were an NA player, he was one of the more frustrating champions in the game. But if you were a Chinese player, you didn't mind. And if you were a Korean player, you didn't mind. In fact, most of the Eastern players listed Yasuo as kind of middle of the pack for frustration. Like, obviously, he wasn't zero frustration, but most Eastern players don't really mind characters like Yasuo. Comparatively, most North American players really, really, really dislike him. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is there can be like really, really like big regional differences between, you know, who likes what champions. And a really important thing we have to think about is that we're a global game for players all over the world, as well as players of, you know, all these different regions and tastes and play styles. And so we always have to like think about, you know, who's good for who and whatnot. Like another example of big regional differences is actually SERAPHINE. When SERAPHINE is strong, NA and EU players start getting fairly upset, and they start playing her a lot as well. So when SERAPHINE's strong, her play rate spikes in NA and EU, and then we get, you know, a number of frustrated folks. You know, reasonably, it's like, you know, it can be tough playing against an AP carry. SERAPHINE as an AD carry. But that doesn't tend to extend to Eastern regions. Eastern regions tend to be significantly less frustrated with SERAPHINE when she's strong, and they play her significantly less as well when she's strong. And so, like, it's just another example of, like, regional differences of, like, whatnot. Comparatively, a character like KAYN tends to be a lot more powerful and frustrating for Eastern regions. Players in NA don't seem to mind KAYN as much as players in China. And so again, there's different champions with different preferences. And, you know, as a global game, you have to like think about things globally. Another thing that we run into as well is, and this one's a fun one, is did you know that younger players like hypebeast champions way more than old players? And so like if you're a player in your 30s, you're much more likely to look at a character like YASUO or Riven and be like, those characters are unfair. They're too mobile. What is all this mobility? Whereas if you're a player who's like, you know, 18 or 20 or in college or in high school or anything like that, those players actually tend to love those characters. Those players tend to look at those characters and be like, these things are the coolest things ever. And so another thing you have to contend with is that actually players' tastes for hype beasts and mobility, both playing as and against, tend to change with age, which is worth noting as well. And so it's like, if I wanted to make a character that makes a lot of, younger players happy, I should be erring on the side of mobility. Whereas if I wanted to make a character that makes a lot of older players happy, I should be erring on the side of like making another, say like Lux or something. And so like, that's another thing to think about as well. And so anyways, if you're wondering why we make like, in quotes, 200 years champs, of course we don't want to make like the actual 200 years champs that are impossible to balance and create these big, nerf and buff cycles over multiple years. Again, like, I don't think Zeri was an ideal release. I think like there's definitely a point where it's like, okay, this isn't actually doing it. But for every character like that, there's other 200 years champs that we make that like actually just end up being very, very popular and very well loved, and players like really, really enjoy them. Because it turns out that, did you know a lot of people love YASUO? Did you know a lot of people love Zed? Did you know a lot of people love Silas? Did you know a lot of people love Akali? Like, these mobile champions that dash around and stuff are a fairly core piece of the game that like a large portion of our player base absolutely loves. And so, do they have to have weaknesses and be well balanced? Yes. Again, I'm going to keep saying, like, I don't think Zeri came out perfect as an example, but I think sometimes you'll see, like, I think it's really easy to get into a cycle of just like bashing anything that's new and different and being like, oh man, here they go again, they added a dash, here they go again, this character steals ults, here they go again, this character has 10 spells. And it's like, do we screw up sometimes? 100%. But I would say, personally, our track record is, well, we have had some characters that haven't been all that easy to balance. For everyone we've done of those, we've done a lot of other characters who have like these new mechanics that tend to be like very compelling and very fun and make the game significantly better in the long run, I would argue. And so yeah, it's a challenge. But like the reason I brought that up is that the original comment that I was speaking to, the player was just like, Riot clearly hates us and doesn't care about us because they make champions that everybody dislikes. That was kind of like the thesis of the statement, was Riot doesn't care about players because if they did, why would they ever make a champion with a bunch of dashes? Or why would they ever make a champion that like is mechanically intense or things like that? And the answer I have to that question is, again, we need to make sure these things are balanced. We need to be like careful about frustration and stuff like that. But characters like Yasuo and Yone and Riven and Lee Sin and Hui and Silas and stuff, they have large player bases of players who deeply, deeply enjoy them and deeply love them, right? And so saying that like nobody likes these things is like kind of like a little detached from reality, I would say.